Your Majesties, Your Excellencies, rabbis, clergy, honored guests, and most importantly, the survivors of Auschwitz-Birkenau who are with us today. This is about you, the survivors. And I cannot begin to tell you how grateful I am that you are here, and in some cases, here with your children and grandchildren. 5 years ago, when I stood here in front of these painful gates, and I admitted that I'm not a survivor, but I'm so grateful for the survivors who are here today. I'm not a liberator, although I salute the courage of the veterans who saved us all. I'm here simply as a Jew, and like Jews everywhere, this place, this terrible place called Auschwitz, has sadly become an inseparable part of all of us. Auschwitz is like a terrible scar from a terrible trauma. It never goes away, and the pain never stops. I've always wondered if I had been born in Hungary, where my grandparents were from, instead of New York in February 1944. Would I have lived? The answer is no. I've been one of the 438,000 Hungarian Jews gassed by the Nazis in 1944, right here in Auschwitz. I can assure you, almost all Jews have pondered this question. 75 years ago today, when Soviet troops entered these gates, they had no idea what lay behind them. And since that day, the entire world has struggled with what they found inside. We have all wondered how an advanced country that gave the world great literature and art, science achievement, could sink to an anger, a meanness, a depravity like Auschwitz. But let me be clear. While Germany and Austria created and carry out this shattering evil, practically every other European country helped the Nazis gather up their Jewish citizens. Too many people in too many countries made Auschwitz happen. When European Jews begged the world for a safe harbor, somewhere to go, the entire world turned its back on them. Even my own country, the beacon of freedom, turned out its light on the Jewish people when they needed it most. The United States organized a conference in Evian, France, in July 1938 to discuss the Jewish refugee problem. There were a lot of lovely speeches, but America did not let any additional Jewish refugees in, and every other country in attendance followed its lead. There were 32 countries, and none of them, except for the tiny Dominican Republic, wanted any more Jews. Hitler saw this. 4 months later came Kristallnacht, and again, there was no world reaction. Hitler tested the world, and at every step, he saw the truth. The world did not care. That's when he knew he could build this factory of death Evian led to Auschwitz. Kristallnacht led to Auschwitz. World anti-Semitism led to Auschwitz. Thankfully, there were some people throughout Europe who had a moral decency and acted differently. Ordinary people who risked their lives and their families' lives to save other human beings. Sometimes people they didn't even know. In Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, you will see 27,362 names on what we call the righteous among nations. These Gentiles who risked everything to save Jewish lives, we have not forgotten. These honorable men and women who we will never, never, never forget. God bless them. Five years ago, at the 70th anniversary, I was very concerned about the shocking rise of anti-Semitism here in Europe. Today, you all know the attacks on Jews, the killings, the vicious slanders have only grown worse, and they have spread to my own country. 75 years ago, when the world finally saw the pictures of the gas chambers here and the piles of bodies, nobody in their right mind wanted to be associated with the Nazis. But now, I see something I never thought I would see in my lifetime: the open and brazen spread of anti-Jewish hatred throughout the world once again. In 2020, we hear the same lies the Nazis used so effectively in their propaganda. They said, Jews have too much power. Jews control the economy and the media. Jews control governments. Jews control everything. We hear this madness online, in the media, and even within democratic governments. We will never eradicate anti-Semitism. It's a deadly virus that's been with us for over 2,000 years. But we cannot look the other way and pretend that it doesn't happen. That's what people did throughout the 1930s, and that is what led to Auschwitz. There are 50 countries represented here today. I know each and every one of you is as disgusted by anti-Semitism as I am. You also know that you alone cannot stop this, but all of you can certainly speak out forcefully against it. We can't rewrite history, but we can be much more forceful today. All of us must remember those brave, moral people who tried to stop this. As all world leaders, all politicians must lead in this effort. Words are not enough. Political speeches are not enough. Laws must be passed, severe, tough, real laws that will put these hate mongers away in prison for a long time. Children must be educated to know where the hatreds of Jews lead. Those are all important. But there's another vital way for world leaders today to fight this age-old hatred. I've asked all countries to stop casting votes in favor of the UN's constant and shameful fixation on Israel. Exactly 3 years, 3 months, and 3 weeks after the liberation of Auschwitz, the Jewish people realized their 2,000-year-old dream and founded the Jewish state of Israel. If for no other reason than the fact that not a single country on earth would take in Jewish refugees when they beg for their lives. That is why the Jewish people need Israel. 75 years ago, the Jewish people left Auschwitz. They fled Europe. They were forced out of every country in the Middle East. And instead of living in refugee camps and turning to terror, they built a vibrant democracy in a place where democracy does not exist. They have created miracle after miracle while having to defend their existence every single day. No other country on earth has had to do this. And for this, the UN, some journalists, and even some government leaders constantly condemn it. But it's even worse. Israel has been singled out over and over again with the same lies that we heard about the Jewish people for centuries. Over the last 7 years alone, the United Nations General Assembly has adopted 202 resolutions condemning countries around the world. Of those 202 resolutions, Israel was condemned 163 times, and the rest of the world only 39. 163 against Israel, 39 for the rest of the world. We all know these votes are absurd. The UN ignores true evil dictatorships that kill millions of their own people. And it's clear as day that this kind of obsessive anti-Zionism is nothing but anti-Semitism. I realize that here at Auschwitz, you are surrounded by numbers. 75 years, 1933, 1938, 6 million. But there's one number that still shocks us while breaking our hearts at the same time. 1,500,000. That's the number of Jewish children, 1.5 million, who died in the Holocaust. It's so painful, we try not to think about it. It just hurts too much. Had these 1.5 million children been allowed to live like others, children around the world, they would now be in their 70s and 80s. They would have been educated. They would have married. They would have had children of their own. Such a loss. But something else as well. What could these 1.5 million children have created for us all? What symphonies, what great literature, what technology, what medical breakthroughs do we lose from these lost souls? There is one more part of the Auschwitz story that no one ever talks about. When the survivors were liberated from this Nazi nightmare, they never sought revenge. They lost their mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers. In too many cases, they lost their wives and their children. And in spite of this, not one German was killed in retribution by a Jew. Not one. Think about that for a moment. After everything that happened to them, these Jewish survivors walked out of these gates and went on to build new lives, raise new families, work hard and create. Some have grandchildren here today. And it is shameful that 75 years later, they now see that their grandchildren face the same hatred again. This is a shame and must never be tolerated. In the end, I'm afraid that all these numbers, 1.5 million children, 6 million Jews, these numbers are just too hard to comprehend. So let me leave you with one last story. It comes from the Eichmann trial in 1961, where witness after witness described their experience here at Auschwitz. But there was one man who stood out because he spoke in an unusually non-emotional tone. He described arriving on this platform here, right here, with his wife and little daughter. They were herded out of the cattle cars, and they stood in line for the selection. Right over there, a doctor would decide who would go to the right to work and who would go to the left for extermination. This man was separated from his wife and daughter at that moment, and they were pushed away. On the witness stand, he said, "There were so many people, I didn't know how I could keep my eye on them." But his little girl wore a red coat, and he was able to watch the little red coat until it got smaller and smaller, and then he couldn't see it anymore. The young Israeli prosecutor, Gabriel Bach, was standing at his chair when the man finished like this. He stood there silently. Finally, the judge asked Bach to continue, but he stood there. Again, the judge told Bach to continue, and again, he just stood there silently. Years later, Bach explained that as fate would have it, he and his wife had just bought their 3-year-old daughter a little red coat. And Gabriel Bach said, to this day, if he goes to a sports stadium or a restaurant or just waiting down the street in Jerusalem and he sees a girl in a little red coat, his throat will tense and he cannot speak. Frankly, after this story, whenever I see a red coat and a little girl, I think the same thing. This is the legacy of Auschwitz, and it will never go away. To every Jewish person and non-Jewish person in this audience who leaves these gates today, we must do this. When we hear something that is anti-Semitic, when we hear someone talk about Israel unjustly, when Jews are attacked in our streets, do not be silent. Do not be indifferent. Do not just do this for the Jewish people around the world. Do this for your children. Do this for your grandchildren. But also do this for the little girl who, in the red coat, whose ashes lay 300 meters away, along with 1 other million tortured souls. They are watching us today, and I cry out in one shattering chorus, do not be silent. Do not be complacent. Do not let this ever happen again to any people. Thank you.